Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have Katy Widrick with us today. She is the owner of Make Media Over, and I had to practice saying that because I always wanted to say Make Over Media, and that is not correct. So, anyways, Katy, I'm really excited to have you today. I know you have a lot of knowledge and background offering fractional CMO services and CRO services to specifically like growth focused organizations. And when you and I talked, we just immediately hit it off. And I was like, she has to come on my
Immediately,
podcast
immediately obsessed with you.
and
So,
talk more about all these things. So thank you so much for being with me.
oh my gosh, I'm so glad. And I have to tell you, so as somebody who works in marketing and branding and storytelling and all of that, I find it very hard to do it for myself. And just to make you feel a little bit better about Make Media Over and how tricky that can be, my very first blog name was Silly Tater Tot. And then get this, it was sillytatertot.blogspot.com. So the only thing I can tell you that will perhaps be give a little bit of forgiveness to baby blogger Katy, this was back in 2008. And so I was really early to the blogging game and did not think about whether that would be the best professional brand for me. Luckily, I've graduated to, I think, bigger and better brands. But yeah, I find this to be a particularly tricky part of marketing.
Yeah. And I don't know, borderline dyslexic too. So when I see the words, it's like my brain goes a million miles an hour than my mouth does. And so it's like I have to pause and be like, okay, did I say that right? Did I read that right? And so, oh yeah, we have a lot to get into today. I'm really
Great.
excited. I love the objective for today's conversation is to really try and outline a framework for other marketing leaders on a correct approach for creating a marketing plan and a well-established, well-oiled marketing engine. And in today's day and age, what is an established engine when we talk about growth-focused organizations, when we talk about startups? So walk me through when you first get hired on, right, to provide fractional CMO services. What are some of the things that you do right off the bat to set yourself up for success? Like, talk me through what you do in your process.
Great question. And I think the first thing that I need to share with you and your audience is that in my definition of a fractional CMO, or the way that I've been able to kind of bring my vision to market, is that I essentially am functioning as an in-house marketing leader for these fast growth, these high growth focused founders, but I'm a contractor. I'm a done for you service provider. So right off the bat, I find that it is a little bit tricky, and kind of getting the balance right is important from day one, because essentially I'm integrating myself often with an existing team, albeit most of the teams I work with are small and scrappy and perhaps bootstrapped. But I'm integrating myself as their CMO. And yet I'm actually not a member of the staff. And especially because of this remote first asynchronous environment that we're in, I find that that is an additional layer of complexity. So to answer your question, the very first thing I do is nothing. I had a mentor who I really respected her approach to coming on board. And this, I think, applies whether you are an in-house marketer who is on staff or you're in a fractional role. Don't move the cups in the first 30 days. Your job is not to come in both philosophically and tactically. Your job is not to come in and try to get yourself the big win. And I find even with myself and knowing that and being disciplined, that's a tricky thing when you're in a new role. But here's why I find it so important. Number one, the most important thing that I can do, not only on day one, but throughout really the first 30 days, is to audit and assess and get access. And so that's a very tactical, technical thing, but I really need to get into the systems. I need to see what the team has been doing, what got them to where they are. Now, an important distinction is that most of the clients and the companies that I work with have an existing product or service line that is generating revenue, and it's profitable, even though it hasn't yet reached the goal of the founder. So I really am not typically coming in the launch or the initial startup mode. But so what that means is that I'm typically inheriting a tech stack. I'm inheriting a marketing automation staff. As I mentioned, I might be inheriting actual staff, team members. So I do very little. I really try to spend my time getting access to everything, which is a more time-consuming task when you are in this role, because not every company has an onboarding or has SOPs, and I'm sure you've discovered that as well. Sometimes your job is really just, how do I get access? How do I get a login? How can I get into your CRM or your ESP or whatever it is? And then I spend a lot of the time just looking and gathering data, because ultimately my job is to increase the conversions or increase the revenue or generate new leads. And I can't know what that looks like until I've gotten a baseline. So I'd say that's the most important thing. Now, there is a caveat, and I'm sure we'll discuss this in more detail, because again, as a fractional CMO, my job security is, of course, about bringing return on investment. Now, that's absolutely true for in-house staff members, but I found, both as somebody who worked in-house for high growth teams for a number of years and is now doing this, there seems to be a little bit more leeway for a staff member. You're expected to come on and it might take you 3 months, 6 months, a year to get fully up to speed. But when you're a contractor, I find that there's sort of a higher expectation. How quickly can we get our money back plus? So the last thing I do, even inside of those first 30 days or so, is I really do look for some quick wins. So if there's something obvious, and I'm very happy to give granular, specific examples, because almost across the board clients are missing some very common signals. But if I can say, hey, while I'm getting access and auditing, I did find this one thing, and it's not going to disrupt your mission, your vision. It's not going to impact the team in a negative way. If we do this one small thing, and by the way, I'll do it. That's usually what, I'll do it. This is not additional work for you or your team. Then I think what we will do is we will go from 5 sales a week in this funnel to 8, or we'll go from 10 people booking calls to 15. And those quick wins are not the long-term growth that a client will hire me for. But I find that really staying disciplined and not moving the cups is the most important thing I can do.
Yeah, I love that, especially when you're kind of tiptoeing around people who are there more permanently than you, but you still have the job that you have to deliver results very, very quickly.
Exactly.
With that in mind, how many people do you meet with to get caught up to speed on what the strategy and the organization is trying to do, right? If we're pressured with getting results really quickly, but we also can't come in and just move too many cups around, what's that balance between getting integrated with not only access to the systems, but also with the strategy and the direction of the company, and using that to identify your quick wins?
Yeah, I think what has been most important for me, and again, a little bit more background context, because I think it will show you that I have learned this on the job, and I've learned this by making mistakes. And so if your audience is hearing this and think, oh my gosh, great, she's got it all figured out. No, let me pull back the curtain and tell you, my journey has been through a lot of trial and error, because as somebody who thrives in the weeds and doesn't always thrive in a more visionary role, I have gotten this wrong. And so I sort of feel often when I'm talking about this level, serving at a high level to high growth founders, I'm certainly not at the end of my story. I have big goals that I'm pursuing, but I'm also not at the beginning. And so, depending on who's listening to this, if you are thinking like any other comparison trap, okay, I'm comparing myself. No, we're going to not do that. And the reason that we have conversations like this is so we can say, here's what I did and here's what I got wrong. Here's what I wish I had known. So I want to say that before I come in and tell everyone, oh, this is the blueprint. With that said, I think one of the things that I've really had to get clear on, and it is a differentiating factor for me, is that most people who call themselves a CMO, a COO, a CEO, or they're operating as the most senior executive on a team, typically what I found is they tend to be more visionary in their approach and less of implementers, executors. I'm the reverse. So I can set a strategy with the best of them. I can cast a vision. And especially when I'm working with a more junior team, it's somewhat natural for me to do that. But my zone of genius is actually in the doing. So I've had to really learn that there's a high value for that, even though I have found, and I'm susceptible to it too, that when I hear about how do you grow as a marketer, or how do you grow your companies, or X, Y, and Z, it's all about like the entrepreneurial mindset. Mine is a little bit more of a service mindset. And so what I do is I really try to separate who I need to get the answers from. So typically what I will do is I will start with, it's usually the CEO in the cases of the companies I'm working with, or the founder. And I will completely dive into mission and vision. And I will stay absolutely away from the details, right? So I'm not asking them, what do you use for your email service provider? How do you track your incoming leads? I don't even ask details of who does what on the team. Typically, when I am having that conversation with the founder, it really is about, what are you trying to accomplish? What do you see as your ideal audience? Where are you now versus where you want to go? And then I have a separate conversation with people who are going to get me what I need and introduce me to what I need. And the truth is, typically that kind of visionary conversation happens with the CEO. And then the access point, how do I get what I need? I'm often sitting down with a project manager or a director, or, and they're my favorite, because these are the people who know where the bodies are buried. These are the people who can tell you, hey, when the website went down last year, this is what we had to do, or here's how I've, duct taped this particular automation together. And so those are my people, right? I keep the vision from the stakeholder, the person who's ultimately hired me and is looking to me to increase whatever their KPI is. But most of the access points come lower in the chain. And I just find that even as somebody who considers herself in the leadership team, and that's a demand that I make on my clients, by the way, I say, I have to be in a leadership position with you to be able to execute at a high level, but I work among the more junior team members, if there are any. And then I just kind of figure it out. There are commonalities for every client. Every client has a CRM, an email service provider, some type of social media presence, some type of website platform. There's sort of a few buckets, and analytics, Google Search Console, all of the sort of tools that help us achieve our goals. If I don't know, then I just start hounding people. But I have a checklist of like, these are all of the things that I need access to. And then I tend to ask as I need them as well.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
So we talked about the first things that you do when you first join a team. You talk about how you go about getting yourself integrated with the team and identifying mission and vision. Now let's get into the weeds. How do you identify what's the right technique or channels or tactics, or whatever marketers want to call it, that will be successful for the organization to hit those KPIs?
Yeah. So one of my favorite things to do is to learn from and work alongside demand gen professionals and top of funnel professionals, because that's also what's sexy in marketing, right? Like, how are we getting more people to know about us, get on our list, do the things? And I can and have done that, especially in my role where, even as I'm stepping in, I mentioned it's usually a small team or a bootstrap team. And so I really have to do a lot of things first and then figure out who we need to hire. And I'm able to make hiring recommendations to my founders as well, which is great. I say, hey, for the last 15 weeks, I've done this. And it's clear that you need somebody who specializes in search optimization. So X, Y, and Z. But my zone of genius is in the middle of the funnel. And again, it's not the standard entry point for a CMO to come in and say, oh my gosh, I can't wait to blow your mind with how amazing the middle of your funnel is going to be. But I've been able to do that with confidence, and I've been able to provide great results for my clients, because if you think about what actually moves the needle, it's not top of funnel. It's how are we nurturing the leads that we have, and ultimately how successfully are we converting them? So I spend quite a bit of my time looking at and optimizing the middle and the bottom of the funnel. And I will really pull back my founders and even, again, my friends in demand gen, who I love, can't stress it enough. I think it's such an interesting and specific skill to figure out where are the people and how do we get them. But if I have 100 leads and none of them are converting, then why would I want 1,000 leads? Mm-hmm. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be a time suck. It's going to be discouraging. And so I will focus my time and see where are the missed buying intent signals, which is sort of what I call the generic version for what are people telling us that we're not measuring? And if I can pull that out, do better storytelling, create better automations, and set the sales team up for more success. So instead of converting 10% of the 100, now we're converting 25%. Okay, by the time we get to the bottom line and we don't have any more people coming in the funnel, we know our numbers. So now instead of 100, I'll go back and I really flip the order. Middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. And I will take as long as I need for that. Like I said, I have fantastic clients and colleagues who will say, okay, we've got you. Let's start turning on the ads. Let's start doing X, Y, and Z. Let's do product demos. Let's do all of this top of funnel. And I have to really have them pull back and say, we can't justify the time to do that. So the middle of the funnel, where people are often telling you what they need, what they want, or what their objections are, and you're just missing it. That's really common, especially for high growth founders who have found success because their product has a great product to market fit. Like they've nailed that, but they haven't nailed the middle and the bottom. Once we do that, I cannot wait to hang out with my demand gen friends and say, let's go. Let's try all the things. Let's try an ad. Let's try an ambassador or an influencer strategy. Let's go all in on SEO. Let's do X, Y, and Z. But that comes later. And sometimes that comes 3 to 6 months into the process.
Yeah, it's interesting that you call that out, because as a demand gen marketer, I've preached the same things. I'm like, we need to figure out what the foundation of this building looks like before we open the floodgates. Like, we have to make sure that the foundation is solid. And to your point, if you're getting 100 of these and none of them are doing anything, like, that kind of sounds like a problem to me that we should fix before we go back out and ask for more.
Exactly.
So I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a setup. That's what I feel. And I've used those words, which, I tend to try to be the good cop as frequently as possible, but every once in a while, even with the people who hold my job in their hands, I really have to say, I have to counsel you not to do this, because it's going to waste your time, waste your money, and discourage everyone on the team from the process. And so I really find that, like I said, being disciplined in the middle and the bottom is a gift, because that's also, you don't have to iterate and adapt very much. Like, once you have figured out the repeatable processes and systems for your funnels, then you can go crazy in top of the funnel, because hey, I now consistently know that my conversion rate in a funnel is 25 to 30%. Anything higher than that is great. Anything lower than that is my red flag. So let the demand gen team go absolutely wild, because you can revise it based on that data.
Yeah. And interesting that you call that out, that demand gen is specifically modeling more of the top of funnel. One of the things that I've been trying to lead within LinkedIn is that demand gen is more than just top of funnel, and it's a full funnel approach, to your point, where it models a lot of that middle and bottom funnel perspective, and even like customer expansions and retentions and partners. Like, it's a go-to-market strategy is the way that I'm trying to frame it, because to your point, you can't open up some of these gates without having a solid foundation to capture, to convert, to figure out where they're going to go in the process. And so really solidifying what that looks like, to your point, is crucial for any organization to want to grow and to be able to grow rapidly without having holes that they have to plug in, like the leaks throughout the way. Exactly. It's just, that's one of the way that we can just build that framework going upwards. Yeah. So,
and I think just to put a bow on that, you said something that really resonated with me just now, which is really, like, the data is going to tell you what is the life cycle of your particular client. And I find that changes depending on the product, the industry, the overall messaging. So I have a client where it takes a solid 90 minutes, they wish 90 days from initial lead, prospect to close. I have another client where if it goes longer than 30 days, they really are a cold lead. They will stay in the nurture, will engage. But if we didn't get them in the first 30 days, just based on the way they open and close their programs, that really is a dead lead. And knowing that is so important, because to your point, when I am working with my friends who are top of funnel demand gen, really, again, we're all kind of full funnel people, but I sort of think of myself as the middle and bottom, and then working with smart people at the top. It's so much more satisfying and more successful to be able to say, we understand that the close for this prospect might be 90 days from now. So how are we working together and forecasting what revenue is going to look like? Because ultimately, that's the other hard part of what we do, is helping clients get those quick wins, but also being able to articulate to them, because of what I'm seeing, this is a 90-day close. And so anything like the leads that you drive right now, you might not convert them for 90 days. Are you comfortable with that? How can I work with you to forecast? And so if in this specific use case, if I were to see that a client has a really short life cycle for their typical client, 30 days or less, then why would I want you to start generating leads now when we don't have, because all those 100, 500,000 leads that come in, if our funnel isn't optimized in the next month, we've totally missed the opportunity. So it's like that data driving decisions, I find, is really helpful. And the more quickly I can pull that and tell my founders or my clients, hey, this is actually your story. This is a typical life cycle for your prospects. I find that they're a little bit more patient with the rest of the process.
Yeah, and even more so when we have sales cycles that are larger than 90
Mhm.
days, right? We have going into 6, 7, 9 months, sometimes 2 years, depending on the complexity and the ACV,
Absolutely.
right? It's crazy
Absolutely.
that people just want to go to market so quickly and then not be able to really understand, okay, like what does this process look like?
Mhm.
You mentioned a really funny word that not a lot of people understand, and I want to dive into as one of the listed questions for our conversation today. And I want to expand more on it, and that's the word forecasting. So when we
Mhm.
talk about forecasting marketing, that sounds like such a scary word, especially for somebody who has no idea what to get started, or where to even start. What are some steps that you would take to forecast marketing? How do you go about painting that story?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So when I was previously in-house for a company, I worked with them about 3 years and worked across it was a pretty cross-functional team. And so I started in the technology department and then moved through operations, moved into marketing, and I was the VP of growth and impact, but it was, by all really intents, it was a chief of staff role. And so I was able to work with all of the team members and sort of make sure that the day-to-day operations were as smooth as possible while working right alongside the founder CEO, who was very, very marketing focused in her own right, just one of the best marketers I've ever seen. And so my job, as I mentioned earlier, was to sort of let her cast the vision and then I implemented. But one of the things that I found particularly helpful in that role was to be thinking about the gap analysis on a day-to-day basis. Now, I'm going to get a little granular,
Let's do it.
but I will try to avoid all of the jargon, or at least explain the jargon. So obviously every business is a little different. And that's one of the things I have to assess in the first 30 days as well. How are you following cash accounting? Do you do accrual? Are you looking at gross? Are you looking at net? Like all of these things that from a business perspective, every single company that I've ever worked with has approached it in a different way or has had a different way of measuring success. So in this particular case, we really did cash accounting. And so we would say, based on any recurring income that we have already booked, what is our MRR? What can we already say is coming in from a revenue standpoint? How many days are there in the month? And then, what's our goal? And the goal, in terms of your question about forecasting, was really, we sort of had nailed down, hey, if we get this many leads, we can convert at this percent. We know that our pricing is this. We know that a typical, an average order is this. And so, we worked with our finance team to do some of those high end numbers in the beginning. And that's still something that I do even with these smaller teams. I have to at least get some sense of what are your margins? And again, what are you measuring? But this gap analysis was very helpful because we could, and I'm just going to use random rounded numbers here for easy math. If the company's goal was to bring in $5 million in top line revenue that month, and we knew that we had 2.5 million coming in MRR, and again, we knew that we had 5% churn, so we would account for that. So essentially, I knew on a day-to-day basis what I needed to average in terms of revenue to hit our goal. And so each and every day I would recalculate that with and for the founder. And I would say, okay, we're ahead of pace, and here's where we are. Here's how much we've brought in. Here's how much we still have booked. The gap is this. And essentially that's an average X dollar day. You name it. We need to bring in 100,000 this month to hit our goal. And that allowed us to have some high days and some low days, but we were always sort of calculating against that median that we needed to hit. Now that's revenue, right? But the reason I use that is that in that particular case, that's how we were measuring success, was top line revenue. And then I had an amazing finance team and a controller who would do all of the other hard math, like what is the actual net, all of this stuff. I was like, okay, if I can just focus on that big round number at the top, then I'm good. But that was the simplest part of it, right? That's pretty straight math. And I knew what the founder's objective was. And I was able to put together this forecasting for what we needed to do this month, where I was then able to take it on a more granular level and kind of tell the CEO what we were doing, but not have her actually have to execute. Is we know how many leads have to come in over the course of a month, because we know how many we convert, and we know how much each of those, how much money each of those conversions brings in. So I love a long forecast. I do quite a bit of annual planning, and even further, 3 and 5 year plans for some of the clients that I work with, especially who may be considering new product lines or a shift in their business model. We certainly do a lot of that sort of long-term look. But for the most part, the companies that I work with and the founders that I work with, they're still kind of in the, how am I generating revenue this month, right? They're profitable, they have capital, they have the cash flow, they're not in danger, but we got to make sure that we're hitting those numbers each and every month, or we'll be in a jam. And so I'm able to reverse engineer and say, okay, if our gap is this, what that means is we need this many leads. Does that make sense? So if I can say, like, we need this many leads because if I convert them, then I'll make this much money. And that's what my gap is. So what that does is I always found it empowering to say at any given beginning of the month, because I would do this at the beginning of every month for the team. And then at every single day, I would be able to say, okay, we have to get 20,000 new leads in. This is obviously a very specific type of business where you're generating a high volume of leads. This was a lower ticket product, so not necessarily typical for every client that I work with. But so we need to get 20,000 leads in, because we know we are going to convert this percentage, because again, we know generally what our benchmarks are, what our history shows us, and that's going to hit our gap. Okay, how are we going to go get those 20,000? And that's when it goes back to the strategy. So it's just another example, I think, of where I do my best work is to start with the granular and get broad. And other people do really well in a CMO role, thinking about the big and then delegating the small. But I find that in the environments where I'm working, it's always easier to figure out, what do I need? And then get creative about how I'm going to get it.
I love that. And a point of confusion, I guess, with modeling a demand gen plan versus modeling a lead gen plan is that lead gen traditionally is predictable, because you can take those conversion rates and you can get, 20,000 leads and whatnot and yada, yada. But what I want to call out here too with what you said is a predictability model is available for a demand gen model as well. Like very much so. Like if you have the data and you're running, you can say traditionally, this is what we bring in. Traditionally, this is our conversion rate. So the math doesn't not apply when we're doing a demand gen model. And I want to call that out specifically because everybody's always like, oh, they just take the traditional like lead gen funnel and the conversion percentage. And it's like, listen, when we talk about foundational scalability and profitability, it talks about understanding what we're currently doing, where we want to go, and to your point, doing that gap analysis. So I model something that's very similar as well. So I'm glad I'm on the right track with someone like you who also does something like that, with figuring out what that gap analysis is.
I love that. Well, and the nice thing too is that, and this is again, as I told you, the experiences that I've had that have been both the most successful and have been the most empowering and fun have been working, again, even in a small team, with people who bring these different approaches. And I so love that you are calling that out, because for better or for worse, mostly for better, I tend to get in the weeds with this structure I just laid out, right? Like, this is predictable, this is repeatable, this is scalable. It's all of those things that frankly someone has hired me to do. But what I don't want to ignore, or what I ignore at my own peril, are these these other approaches. And again, when you talk about a typical sort of lead gen funnel, This particular, use case that I was talking about where I was in-house, the reason we were able to hit those lead goals and ultimately hit the revenue goals is because we were working with a large number of ambassadors. We were working with, all of these kind of disciplines, and some traditional and some non-traditional, marketing and demand gen strategies. But again, if we could sort of tell everybody involved, this is what we're trying to achieve, and these are the goals we have to hit, then you really can't discount any approach, right? Ultimately, if we're saying the most important metric for this particular client or this particular organization is top line revenue, then we're all on the same page, and how we get there isn't nearly as important as the getting there.
Yeah, I love that you call that out. The whole point is being able to actually achieve those goals. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're all measured on. That's what we're all have those job securities for. That's a great call out. The last question that I have for you today, and this is more just like a resource educational question for my listeners. One of the things is I reflect back into me being in-house as director of demand gen. Sometimes I didn't always have that direct line of communication with finance or, the financial models, and really being able to understand the business goals and how that models into a demand gen plan. It actually wasn't until I stepped into the consulting role where, for whatever reason, the companies trust consultants that much more to share those type of details. So how can you share how you went about learning how to do that type of financial modeling and financial planning, specifically as it relates to marketing? And then what tips do you have for anybody who's currently in-house on how they can start learning that? Because that's definitely a crucial part to any role, whether we're in-house, right, or on the outskirts. So I'd love for you to share your knowledge right now with the audience on that.
Yeah. So there's a phrase that I remind myself on the days where I don't feel courageous, and it is that you don't get what you don't ask for. And so certainly what I will tell you is that, even the most well-intentioned managers, directors, founders, whatever stage you are in. And again, I think I really want to tell you, this applies to the most junior level coordinator, who's kind of early in on the role or in the industry, all the way up through senior management. The people can have the best intentions, and they are so consumed in their own goals, right? I did this as well. I would be laser focused on my own objectives, my own role, my own to-do list. And I didn't always step back, or I didn't always really allow myself to step back and say, what does my team need? Right. And I will tell you, one of the things that I am actively working on as a senior leader is that I'm not great at delegating. I think I'm an excellent mentor. I think I'm an excellent coach. I really love working, especially with, these smaller, younger teams. And there's so much value in, what is it? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I believe in that. Absolutely. But it's not instinctual for me to step back and say, okay, let me pause what I'm doing and say, okay, like, what does Janelle need? Like, what can I give her? And so what I found by just being bold and just asking was asking for what I needed, and asking for more and more and more. And if a CEO or if a stakeholder told me no, two things were true. Number one, I was able to better understand whether this was a long-term fit for me. And it was nothing against them, because if I'm, a junior team member and I'm asking the CFO for, there's certainly boundaries. But if that's not something that they share, and they're not able to sort of articulate, here's the access that you need, or here's what it would take to get the access, then that might not be a long-term fit for me. So there's some hardness in that. But I think the earlier you find out, like, is this a team? Is this an organization that believes in visibility and accountability, right? Because ultimately it's your responsibility, if you ask for access, to safeguard it and to be a great keeper of that. And that takes time and trust. But again, what I also really discovered is that most of these people that I would work with were desperate for help. And so they just needed to know what you needed. And so, again, I'll think of myself, when I was first in the role, and I was really helping to build a very young marketing team in this particular case, with a very, very fast growing company, lots of profitability, like great product to market fit. And we were sort of building the plane as we were flying it, like a lot of fast growth and high growth companies will do. And so we would arbitrarily just throw out these goals, back to the conversation you just had about forecasting. We weren't always great about that in my early days. We would just say, we need more leads. Okay, we had 5,000 this month, so we need 10,000 this month. We just kind of pulled it out of thin air. And what I found is that because I am like such a numbers nerd and I am so analytical and I'm such a processor, is that I would go to do this reverse engineering and I would just see like there's a missing piece. And so asking and detailing, here's why. If I have access to this information, then I'll be able to better tell you when we get 5,000 leads and we convert 25% of them and our product is this and our margin is this, you get this. And so I find that the more you're able to articulate why you're asking for this access, the more times you're going to hear a yes. And then the other thing is just, and again, this is about confidence. And I did not always have it, but the more you get confident, the more confident you feel. It's a very like self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I really just started asking, can I be in the room? And so, the more that you just say, hey, can I just sit in and listen? And again, you have to have established trust. There's no way that on your first day even if you're a more senior person, all of a sudden just entering into these more private meetings, it's probably not going to go well for you. But the more that you establish the trust and do it as quickly as possible, the more you can say, hey, can I just sit in and listen? I really want to understand why, right? And if you can position it as like, if I can better understand the overall goals and strategy, I'll be able to do my job better. And there is a certain sense of telling the story to the gatekeepers of the information. I'm here to give you the best return on investment of me. And the way that I can do that is to have access to A, B, and C. Can you walk me through what the strategy is? Can you help me understand when you say we had a good month, what does that mean? And again, if they say no and you articulate why you're asking and they say no again, don't give up. The more that you build these successful campaigns and these successful ideas, the more you're going to have the power to go in and say, that was great, but I know that if I had had a better understanding of why we couldn't hire more sales, all of these intricacies. But I really like the short answer to your question is you don't get what you don't ask for. And people are not going to read your mind. And I will just put a bow on it and say, every time that I'm really trying to think, I think every time without exception that I have asked for additional access, the person has been impressed with that request because they see, oh, she's here asking the right questions and she understands what we're trying to achieve and she doesn't have the info she needs. And that it was never perceived as she's trying to get in our business and see where the money is, right? So I think it's just courageous, just the courage to ask for the information that you need and to articulate why.
Yeah, I love that. And this is why you and I bonded so much from the get-go, because you're like speaking my entire experience. Like I was literally the person like, hey, can I just sit in on that meeting? Like, hey, I want to learn about that. Hey, and I was told yes, and they brought me in because I wanted to learn and I was asking the right questions. So this is why you and me, we're always,
exactly.
hitting it off on
we
calls.
want more people in our circle. We want more people who are, again, you don't have to be fearless. I'm not fearless, but you do need to be courageous if you are pursuing growth and leadership in your role. And don't be afraid to lead from where you are either. So if you can model that for any direct reports that you have and just say, hey, before we kick off this meeting, I want to share some numbers. When we did this last campaign, this, and this, and it could literally be like, share the open rate, share the click rate, share the booked call, whatever it is that you're measuring. If you can say like, here's information that I want all of you to have, it basically positions it that now people want to tell you about their numbers. So it works really well. That's a little sneaky tip.
Yeah. And one short story on my end, how I actually learned about modeling marketing and the whole revenue aspect of that and taking into consideration churn rate, the whole mathematical equation. I suck at math from the get-go.
Same.
Like,
hard
growing
same.
up, I was never good at math. Even to this day, I will tell you I hate math, but it's a part of our job. It's part of our roles. And it definitely is a part of the books in terms of what's profitable and what makes sense and how you and me can end up getting our paychecks, right?
Exactly.
My dad is a CPA.
Oh,
And
bless
without
your
going too
heart.
much into into details, he was working with a really large, well-known company who worked alongside this individual on his team that did forecasting and revenue modeling for marketing and for marketing contracts and da da da. And I asked if, without sharing anything proprietary, confidential, nothing, like teach me how the freak to do this. And lo and behold, I owe my whole career and life to this man. But he gave
Amazing.
me a template, a model, like everything. And if it wasn't for me asking, to your point,
Mhm.
for me having the willingness to learn, and also that individual being willing to share the knowledge and take the time to actually teach me, I don't think I would have been successful in the early years of
Mm.
me being in demand gen, where we are so close and tied to math and revenue and pipeline and all those crazy
Exactly.
numbers, scary numbers. So also, yes, definitely go into your own company and ask, and to your point, make sure you know what you're asking for and makes sense, and you're not just looking to leak proprietary
Mhm.
information. But also look to see who in your network you could ask these questions to, and just learn it like at a high level, because it wasn't until I got the concept of what this looks like before I could then go into my role and figure it out, on my own. But the concept was so scary and big, and math, was scary.
Yes.
And I just need somebody to just give me like that overview of like, what are we actually trying to look for that.
Yes,
So
yes. And it's so funny, I have worked with incredible founders and CEOs, names that you and your audience know, people who have disrupted the marketplace. And across the board, I have learned when I've built relationships with them that they are often figuring out as they go as well. And they're one step ahead of most people, but maybe just one step. And so, like, remember that you also have the power. I love your story to say, hey, I went and I found this external option. I researched it. I'm ready to implement it. I did all of it. And now I'm presenting it to you as a done for you solution. You don't need to make any decisions. I'm just telling you, I've given you this gift. Like, these CEOs and founders are really appreciative of it, because we have put them on a pedestal for good reasons, but also they are just as nervous and just as trepidatious, and they have the same imposter syndrome as anyone else. And many of the people who have made it to be incredibly successful business professionals were not necessarily business trained. They did not go to business school. They did not, come up in the world of investment and finance. They just had a great idea or a great service. And so these are not always people that are fantastic CMOs plus CFOs plus CEO, right? They're in one lane. And so I find that relationship and saying, I did this to take it off your plate. I know you're overwhelmed. And so here's this gift. It puts you in such a power position. So I love, love, love that. And in fact, I'm going to take that away and steal it as something I share with my own audience when I talk about
yeah.
opportunities.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Katy, I've loved this conversation. I know we're coming up on time, so I want to be respectful of, the time that we had allocated for each other. Where can people get a hold of you, find you, follow you?
That's such a great question. So my portfolio website is katywidrick.com. And if you go there, you can find all of the links to all of the things. I'm on Instagram. I have a podcast called The Rising Tide Talent Show, where I really talk a lot about marketing and revenue strategies, but also just the entrepreneur life. And I would love for your audience to subscribe and listen to those episodes. But I would absolutely love to connect with anyone. So find those links at katywidrick.com. And I'm really looking forward to getting to know some of your listeners.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for taking the time to chat with me.
My pleasure. Thank you.